Hello, my name is Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims. I'm an educational consultant with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, the PaTTAN system, out of our Harrisburg office. I am pleased to present another installation of our webinar series on significant disproportionality. Today's topic is family and community engagement, one of the equity pillars of practice from the PDE Equitable Practices Hub. Please note, the resources presented in the series are not required as part of the significant disproportionality process. These are simply to offer guidance should an LEA choose to seek out training and/or technical assistance. Welcome to a review of the Family and Community Engagement Pillar from the PDE Equitable Practices Hub. In prior webinar series offerings, you have seen us describe general equity practices, self-awareness, and data practices. We have now arrived at the fourth pillar, family and community engagement, and we look forward to the sessions that will cover academic equity and disciplinary equity. Please feel free to visit the Hub for more information. The objectives for today's webinar are to identify the standards of the Pennsylvania Family Engagement Birth through College, Career, and Community Ready Framework. Also, to review considerations for effective engagement and collaboration. And finally, describe how authentic family and community engagement supports mitigating significant disproportionality. Where can you focus? As you consider the roles that you hold in various educational spaces, whether you are a teacher, a speech and language pathologist, a school psychologist, etc., can you evaluate your current engagement with families? Are the partnerships equitable? As leaders and administrators in educational spaces, how will you create conditions for families and communities to have a place at the decision-making table? These are questions I'd like for you to consider as we move through the remainder of the webinar. Another question that drives these efforts as connected to the equity pillar of practice is, what is the role of the educational community beyond the school in driving educational equity efforts? One thing to keep in mind is, as we discuss policy and practice related to equity, families and communities are the sole drivers of that effort. Their input is significant in determining what is then put into practice and executed by school staff. And so it is important for us to ensure that families and communities have an active voice and partnership with us. An overview of the pillar again is, as an educational community, we have to seek to examine our own strengths and weaknesses as they pertain to equity. We can't do that without the important voice of families and the local community. It's also important to note that as we consider communities and families, that students are also a very tremendous voice in these efforts. It's important to note that the student body itself is representative and a part of the surrounding community, and so those families and communities have a direct interest in the practices of their children's school. So, what is a family school partnership? I think it's important to offer this definition as we consider what it means to have true, authentic engagement. And so I offer the three C's as part of this definition: cooperation, coordination, and collaboration to enhance opportunities and success for children and adolescents across social, emotional, behavioral, and academic domains. And that essentially speaks to the whole child. And so, as we think about our roles as educators and what families and communities can offer, the importance of cooperation, having that ability to connect, to coordinate the efforts and ensure that there's intentionality, and then effective collaboration where voices are valued and honored. At this point, I'd like to introduce us to the Pennsylvania Family Engagement Birth through College, Career, and Community Ready framework and the 6 standards that go along with this framework to really anchor the efforts of family and community engagement from a statewide lens. In addition, when you visit the Hub, you'll notice that each of these standards are in a specific place with connected resources dedicated to the particular standard. The first one, connect families to community resources that support their goals, interests, and needs. Number two, build partnerships with families that are strengths based, authentic, reciprocal, and respectful. Number three, partner with families to identify information, resources, and strategies to support them in their roles as teachers, models, encouragers, monitors, leaders, and advocates as they support their child's learning and development. Number four, provide intentional opportunities for families to connect and engage with each other. Number five, support families as they develop their leadership and advocacy skills. And number six, build partnerships with families during times of transition. Each of these key standards drives the efforts of authentic family engagement. And so, as we synthesize those standards and think about best practices, I'd like for us to consider what Clark, Sheridan, and Christensen deem the four A's. They are approach, attitude, atmosphere, and actions. With approach, we're establishing the tone or the method of engagement and the manner in which we'll engage in a family school partnership or engagement relationship. It's important to establish that tone early on to say, "You're welcome, we value, and we honor you." Those simple things can make the difference in how we then engage. Attitude is also very important. Those are the underlying feelings, emotions, positions that might be held by family members, community members, and also our school staff. So if we have an adversarial relationship, how can we unpack how shifting our attitude may adjust how we approach families and communities and engage in a positive way? Some families have had negative experiences even as students who are now parents of students in the same building. And so those attitudes can be permanent in some ways, but also can be malleable and able to adjust when encountering people who have shifted their approach in engaging. Atmosphere is critical, physical and effective climate. So, that welcoming feeling when you walk into a building, knowing that you're an important part of that process or experience when you come into a place that sees you as someone that has something to contribute. Physically, being able to see things that represent family. So it could be a flag that represents the country of a family that has come from a different place. It could be simply being able to walk into the office and hold a conversation in a very clean and respectful way. Actions. These are the strategies and practices that essentially create those effective partnerships. So, not just saying that we're engaging with families, but actually demonstrating that. What are the actions that show that we value you? And so I'd like to think for us to think about culturally responsive and sustaining practices with families. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, there may be families who come from different backgrounds and that we may not have necessarily ever engaged with before. And so these culturally responsive sustaining practices can be helpful for us to think about ensuring that families that are different or perceived as different have an opportunity to be an active member of our school community. So it's allowing us as educators to see parents and caretakers as partners of equal power. And that's why you'll notice we say allowing people to join us at the decision making table, not simply just the table, because what that insinuates is that the power dynamic only rests on the school's shoulders, and we want that power to be shared. We have to also acknowledge with that shared power that parents and family members are experts on their children and on their own community. They send us the best they have and they know their child the best. So it's important for us to value that. Also, knowing that parents and caretakers are problem solvers. However, they're not our problems to be solved. And I think that's so important. Allowing the ownership to lie in this collaboration rather than seeing a need in a family and wanting to fix that family. That's not always our role. We have to think about meeting families where they are rather than waiting and expecting families to meet the school and educators where they are. And essentially what that means is every family is different. We come from different families as educators too. And so sometimes families aren't comfortable in the school building. As I've mentioned, there may be a lack of trust there. Are we willing to meet them in different places? And figuratively, are we willing to at least meet them halfway on even a thought or a decision? And then accept that the effectiveness of family engagement is measured in impact and not intention. And this really goes back to that thought of we want to help, we're fixers, but in reality, we have to know if our fixing may be seen as disrespectful or inappropriate, depending on who's in receipt of that. And so that's that really tightrope or the dance that we have to do to know if we're being truly culturally responsive and ensuring that our intentions don't create an impact that's negative. And so here are some examples of culturally responsive and sustaining practices. Multilingual surveys. There are some schools across the Commonwealth where there are over 40 languages spoken. It is important as much as possible to ensure that there are surveys where we can get the input of families that are multilingual so that those concerns, needs, and resources and ideas are available to us. We want to use at least three different methods of communication to reach families because we know no single method works for every family. Some families like to receive text messages, some prefer email, some prefer a phone call. So it's just being aware that we may need to think outside of the box or be willing to do more than just one thing. It would be important to think about weekly communication with community organizations and leaders. How do we start to empower community to be at these decision making tables to ensure that their voice is also heard? Communities really understand that the school can be a hub, it's a microcosm of society. It can be a hub for how communities can support not only students, but families. So, jobs, healthcare, etc. Those community members and organizations can really lend a hand in ensuring there's a comprehensive approach to supporting families and communities and students. Consider recording video guidance for families. As I said, different methods of communication may be helpful. As we've transitioned through the pandemic and we've had to move to virtual spaces and families have had to adjust as quickly as we have, sometimes getting onto something as we think now is easy with Zoom, for some families that was brand new to them. So having video guidance about how to access platforms or access materials might be really important. And then in all family engagement efforts, it's critical that we center families who have traditionally been marginalized, the voices that have been muted or ignored, and ensure that those families, if they're not comfortable speaking in front of a team of people, has one connection to the school to ensure that those voices are heard. So, how does family and community engagement support addressing significant disproportionality? Number one, it allows teams to utilize that expertise we talked about that families and communities have to support whatever action planning we're going to take to mitigate those disproportionate outcomes. And also, what interventions or processes are we going to look to put in place? We need their expertise to provide input. I can't say enough how important it is for families and communities to be active members of our educational teams. We know with IEP teams how critical it is to have a family member there. We also know that with multi-tiered systems of support, PBIS teams, SAP teams, etc., family members provide input that drive our decisions and drive the actions we do. It doesn't mean that families have to be at every single meeting, but providing a space where the team is assembled that families can have that opportunity to speak. And lastly, allows for the willingness to consider different viewpoints in the context of cultural humility. We won't know every single thing about every single family from every single background. However, if we're humble enough and willing enough to listen, we can think about what they're sharing with us and how that translates into how we make identification recommendations, how we make placement recommendations, and also disciplinary decisions in special education. And ensuring that it's okay for families and communities to be able to call us in and also call us out when necessary. So I leave you with this last statement. It's imperative that we recognize that families' overall well-being is it's an essential precondition of student learning, and that schools play a critical role in society by promoting that well-being, whether directly or through community partnerships. It is critical that we all are engaged together: student, family, community, and school, all of us play an intricate role in supporting students' overall trajectories, and we have an obligation to ensure that we do so. I would like to leave you with a resource. In addition to the Equitable Practices Hub, our PaTTAN system also has a family engagement initiative that is very much available to anyone that wants more information on engaging families and what that can sound like, look like, and feel like. In particular, supporting students with disabilities. And so I would encourage you to visit www.pattan.net/supports/family engagement. And please take a tour of the website. If you have any questions or need to reach out, please do not hesitate at nhollandsims@pattan.net. See you next time.